Thank you very much, Ms. Overtoom, for the introduction. It's great to have you all here in Amsterdam. I think it's a great city. You can see here our golden age. If you are at the canals, this is really an aspect of our history, because we were a seafaring nation, we still are. You're here in the neighborhood of Central Station, the whole area has changed. You also see other parts in Amsterdam. I think it's a great city. I studied here, had a great time, and every time when I'm in Amsterdam I have a very good feeling. At this moment, of course, it's a sad time, because last week our mayor, Mr. van der Laan, passed away, too young, and he was a great mayor, did a fantastic job, and we think about him with gratitude and admiration, and now our thoughts are with his wife and children. Here in Amsterdam, but I must say my memories goes a bit back to Singapore. I was there a few weeks ago and had a meeting with the CEO of the Port of Singapore. And we spoke about issues, as you mentioned, also about sustainability issues, and we spoke about the role of startups. And startups say something about the fact that it's necessary to have new ideas. It was a fascinating visit we had. We had a meeting with him. But also, I attended a conference of the Singapore Institute of Directors. 1,000 people over there. I was invited to give a speech. And the item of the whole conference was, what about sustainable business practices? It's remarkable. Then we had a conference of Temasek. It's a big investment company. And there was a meeting with 50 high-ranked CEOs about the question, how can we encourage and stimulate long-term thinking? It's a changing world. I was attending a new ship built by a Hirama company. And there was a story about using new equipment, new materials, new coatings. And it was not a diesel engine, but an LNG one. It's changing. You can feel the dynamism. That was about Singapore. I also should say something about Rotterdam, because now I'm based in who's from Rotterdam here? For the port? Great to see you. then we have the balance between Amsterdam and Rotterdam. It's so funny. In the early days, there was always a kind of rivalry, kind of struggle between Rotterdam and Amsterdam. 0-2, 0-10, 0-20. Things have changed. I already discussed with you. You can see now it's a good cooperation between the Port of Rotterdam and the Port of Amsterdam. It's really great. So today I'm busy in the neighborhood of Rotterdam. I like it very much. I live in Capelle aan de IJssel. But also there you can see the changes. And I must say, I want to thank you for your remarks, because you were already underlining that we are living in a changing world. And let me start with making a reference to what you've said about Al Gore. When I was Prime Minister, I was invited to introduce him here at a cinema in Amsterdam, in Tuschinski, for the release of his film, An Inconvenient Truth. And you've all seen that film. And it really increased awareness. And later on I saw another film, Chasing Ice. A film about a cameraman who installed cameras on Iceland, Greenland and Alaska. And if you compare the film of Al Gore with that film, Al Gore showed a picture of the Alps 100 years ago and now, and then you can see that ice caps are gone. But the film Chasing Ice was about a cameraman who installed cameras not 100 years ago and now, but between 2006 and 2009. And piece of ice as big as Manhattan and twice or three times as high, they disappeared in 3 years' time. Pictures in Alaska, Greenland and Alaska. It's amazing. I think the awareness really has increased. And that brings me to the content of my speech. I intended, how much time do I have? Doesn't matter. How much? 10 minutes? I need half an hour. That's always, already, you have to negotiate with the moderator. I will try to be a bit brief. I intend to make 3 points. First, I want to make some remarks about the global agenda. The second remark is about the necessity of having alliance and partnerships, and the third is about taking action. You agree with these 3 points? Yeah? Shall we do it? Did I miss anything? Oh, you're okay? Okay, this was the moment of interaction in my speech. First, about the global agenda. Al Gore, you mentioned already. When I studied here in Amsterdam in the 70s, we had indeed the Club of Rome. In those days, issues around environment were left-wing oriented issues. That was a time for the government against the business sector. Time has changed completely. Today we have a global agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals, of climate change and the circular economy. And this is not left or right, it is not a government or business, it has to do with everyone. And I think the awareness really has increased. If you talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm happy that they are there. Before that we had the Millennium Goals in 2000. And the good thing is that 80% of those goals were met. And it had to do with the fight against poverty and hunger, more education for children. So you can make a difference if you have a clearly defined agenda and if you're willing to take up action. You already referred to those SDGs, and I think it's a great agenda. So this is really key, that we are taking these SDGs seriously, but also that we are taking action. The other one is, of course, climate change. I was happy with the outcome of Paris. It's not enough to reach the goals, but in any case, it has been an important step. And also the binding international agreement of countries saying every 5 years you have to report about how do we reduce the CO2 levels. I think it's really great that we have this agenda. And it's not only a message for governments, it also counts for NGOs, it counts for businesses, for knowledge centers. We need everyone. Everyone must be on board. So that's really important. And I was at the Copenhagen summit. That was completely different, because we did not have the international binding agreements. And I thought, this is crazy. I was in the palace of the Queen of Denmark. And I knew the palace quite well. I had my first international meeting and that in that palace, with the Asian heads of government and the European heads of government. And the dress code was, for all, dark suit. One prime minister was dressed in a black tie. I said, what are you doing? Yeah, he said, I received the wrong dress code of my protocol officer. And now already 3 people asked me to get a glass of wine. People thought he was the waiter. So always take into account the dress codes. So Copenhagen was disappointing. But now you can see the climate change issue is really high on the agenda, and people feel obliged to take up action. So that's really necessary. And the third one, that has to do with the circular economy. I'm really convinced that we cannot go on with our production and consumption styles. At this moment, we're already living and producing and consuming above the capabilities of our planet. 1.4 the capabilities of the planet. And if you will see that China will go up and India will go up, you have middle class, then it can be 2 or 3 times the capabilities of our planet. It's impossible. So that's the reason we have to rethink the use of natural resources and materials. There's a famous architect, a German architect, Thomas Rauch, he lives here and working here in Amsterdam, and he says the next year, in 2018, we must have the universal declaration of the rights of materials, because he says we cannot go on with our current styles of production and consumption. And he is also in favor of a material passport. So if you're already realizing a building, which materials are in, and how can we reuse it when the building is at the end of a life cycle. So these are the things that are on the agenda. And the good thing of the SDGs is it's not a nice meeting of government leaders in New York. No, it's really essential that we say we want to take these goals seriously. What I notice more and more is that companies are already referring to SDGs in their annual reports. What are we going to do? Which SDGs are relevant to us, and how can we do much more in this field? I'm happy with that. So, and when we talk about Paris, we have to do much more. That counts also for businesses. I must say the time of Milton Friedman, when he said, the business of business is business. 1970, that time is over. For business now, it's creating shared value. You must generate economic value, otherwise you cannot invest, you cannot keep your people employed, but it's also about creating and generating societal value. So the role of business has changed. It's also about new alliance and long-term thinking. So the world is really changing, and it has to do with honesty. Also being honest in what you're doing, reporting. The Port of Rotterdam was the first organization in the Netherlands that started with integrated reporting. Also reporting about your societal performance. That's good. And we have to measure things. Measurement and reporting are really key. So this is about the global agenda. I'm happy with the agenda. Second one, have you read the book Why Nations Fail? I'm a professor, so I have to mention in any case one book. It's a beautiful book of 2 professors, one from Harvard and one from MIT, and the key question was 15 years research, 3,000-year world history, and the key question was under which conditions can countries be successful or not? Yeah?
What was the name of the book?
The book is Why Nations Fail. You have it? Atsamoglu and Robinson are the authors. And they asked the question, under which conditions can countries be successful? And they said, and the answer is very clear. 1, you always must be innovative. Sometimes you have to stop activities, creative destruction. 2nd, you must have the rule of law. No corruption, a good civil law system, criminal law system, etc. And the 3rd one, that I would like to underline that. You must have inclusive institutions, meaning that people must be able to share the revenues of economic well-being. An inclusive institution also has to do with take up your responsibility regarding sustainability issues. Inclusive capitalism is a new word you can hear more and more. Then about the alliances. Parakana, another book. Yeah, you are writing it down. Parakana is beautiful. He was 33 years old and he wrote a book with the title, How to Run the World. Isn't it great? You're 33 and you write a book with the title, How to Run the World. He has a fantastic network of people. He knows the classics, the Greek philosophers and so on. And it's a beautiful book about the question, what about governance today? He said, at this moment we can see, in fact, that the role of the nation state is a bit fading away. The issues of today, environmental issues, security issues, economic developments, that is above the level of the nation state. And you see worldwide new alliances between governments, NGOs, religious groups, businesses, in order to find the solutions for today. And you already made the reference to the Dutch model of organization. We always are a country of coalitions. We always have minorities. And usually people say, if you want to describe the Netherlands, you are using the word polder model. You know the word polder, that means reclaimed land. This country is for 1/3 below the sea level. So we always had the fight against the strength of the water. And that meant that people in early days, they had to work together to keep those dikes and dunes, etc. intact. So you need each other to keep your feet dry, we know that. And in the 17th century, our golden age, we had Dutch East Indies companies. It was a matter of investing together, taking risks, and sharing revenues. That was the international mindset. In the 19th century, we did not have a real class struggle in this country because employees and police were convinced you have to work together. After the Second World War, we had to build up our country. It was also a matter of having very moderate wages and let's work together to build up our nation. And when the economic difficulties in the 80s, employers and employees said we have to work together. When I was Prime Minister, of course we had criticism, sometimes from the unions, but 7 times we had a social agreement with and social partners, employees and employees. And a few years ago we had an energy agreement. All this underlines the fact of you have to work together. If you talk about innovation today, we say you need triple helix constructions. Triple helix means you need and the governments, and the business sector, and knowledge centers. In my first meeting when I became part of corporate responsibility at EY, Ernst & Young, was with the head of sustainability of IKEA. And he said, if you want to talk about sustainability in a company, it's not only about you as a company, it's also about your suppliers and the other companies and your clients. It has to do with the whole value chain. Nice story about IKEA. Who's here from Sweden? You. Good to see you. Then I have to tell the story about your king and queen. They came to the Netherlands for a state visit. You know, the relations between your royal family and our royal family are really excellent. And I remember so well, so then I was invited for a state banquet organized by the King of Sweden, and I received the highest decoration of your country. Yes, and I was dressed in white tie, with the sash and the star of your country, with my other decorations. I thought, well, I went to the state banquet, well, white tie with all the decorations, oh my God. And the sash was, of course, the colors of your flag, blue and yellow. And then when I left my room, then my advisor said, oh, you've become IKEA Worker of the Week. Never forget that. But I mentioned the story of IKEA because it has to do with the whole value chain approach. That's one. If you talk about innovation, I already mentioned triple helix. If you talk about sustainability practices, you can see that big companies, they do invest in relation with the startups. You have to share knowledge. I already mentioned we have an energy agreement in this country. You have to work together, otherwise you will fail. Let's say the maritime sector, but also the air transport sector was not part of Paris. So I think it's really necessary that within the framework of IATA, also the air companies are saying, let's do much more. A company like KLM are really investing in better energy sources. The biofuels, for example, they're the first company, and said you cannot act alone. You need an organization called Sky Energy. You have to work together in order to be able to reach success. That's also the reason why we founded the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. I have the honor to be chairman of that. 8 multinationals: Shell, Unilever, Heineken, Akzo Nobel, Philips, and the others. And we've said let's learn from each other. How can we think about new business models? How can we fully integrate sustainability into business models? What about leadership and corporate governance aspects? And let's ask ourselves the right question. So the question for a company is, what are we doing in the sphere of the SDGs? What are we doing regarding the outcome of the Paris Agreement? You have to ask yourself the right questions, and that really can stimulate the discussion. So that's what we're doing with the Digital Growth Coalition. On a world scale, we have Global Compact with the United Nations. We have the World Economic Forum, OECD. There are a lot of fora where you can learn from each other and in which you can work together. I think it's really necessary. And that brings me to my, one remark. And it's also my last point, because I already had like 10 minutes, I'm afraid. Yeah? The problem with politicians is when they have a microphone, they never stop talking. Yeah, I'm not a politician any longer, so I should know my limits as well. The necessity to take action. This is my last book, Abundance, of Peter Diamandis. Peter Diamandis, he was involved in the second flight to Mars. And he wrote a beautiful book about what are the key challenges of today on a global scale. Hunger, poverty, health, education, everything. And he discovered that at this moment we do have the technical means to cover all those issues. But there are so many vested interests, traditional ways of thinking, and those developments prevent us to have such a situation that we are taking benefit of all those technical solutions. I think you really can make the change, and we have to be very practical. For example, if you're a company and you're producing beer, you can say, well, you produce beer and we make profit, that's our business. Okay? But also you can say, we have a policy, like Heineken is doing, we have a policy that we will use the policy of local sourcing in Africa. In 2020, 60% of all the grains needed for the production of beer must be produced locally. Why? Less transport, less environmental pressure, less CO2 emissions, and more local opportunities for the local farmers. You can say, well, we produce coatings, and that's our business. You also can say, we produce coatings that can keep out partly the heat of the sun, so that you need less energy for ecosystems. A company like Unilever says, and within so many years, we want to double our turnover, but at the same moment, we want to reduce our carbon footprint by half. And this is a matter of taking action. This counts for the bigger companies. I was in Roosendaal. Many of you will not know, Roosendaal is a smaller city in the Netherlands. And I was there at the meeting with the SMEs, and the question of these SMEs was, what can we do about it? And they heard beautiful stories about what they are doing on a local scale. There was an employees association in that part of the Netherlands, in Brabant and Zeeland. Who's from Zeeland? No, Zeeland is the most beautiful part of the Netherlands. Well, very moderate reaction. But in any case, it made some commercials now for Zeeland. And the employees association said, let's make an agreement. All the companies who are a member of this organization should have solar panels on their roofs. So it is a matter of taking action. You can make a difference, but you must have the willingness to change. And I must say, I admire all those organizations, companies, knowledge centers, governments who are really willing to take up action. So the good thing is that we've seen also in the past that if you have the willingness to change, you can make a difference. The Millennium Development Goals, as I said, were meant for 80%. We had and still have the problem of the hole in the ozone layer. But people said years and years ago, we have to start fighting these CFKs. And just because of this action, now we can see that the whole of the ozone layer is narrowing. Once I spoke with Wubbe Ockels, he was a famous Dutch astronaut. Unfortunately, he died. And he had a ship, a really sustainable ship, sailing boat. He said, Jan-Peter, I'm sailing with this ship on the oceans. And I'm dependent on the quality of the bow of that ship. If the bow is not okay, then I can forget it. It can cost my life. And what a bow it means for the ship is the ozone layer for our planet. We only have one. And if that would disappear, it's over. And we have to be aware of the fact that we're running out of time. And that's, I think, an essential element of Paris. We cannot wait. We have to take up action. That counts for everyone. And therefore, there must be the awareness of the global agenda. There must be the willingness to work together with others. You need new alliances and partnerships. and we must be very concrete and specific. And therefore, I'm so happy with, let's say, what you're doing here in Amsterdam, what the Port of Rotterdam is doing, and counts for other ones. Let's work together in order to have a better world, and that we can take up the challenges. I'm almost a reverend now, but I'm allowed to do it because in this area you can say, we should say something like a sermon. Yeah, in early days people all went to church and now we use it for conferences. In any case, I think it is good taking benefit of the beautiful area in which we're in. I hope you have a great time in Amsterdam, but most importantly, of course, is let's take up action. Let's do everything to find solutions for the global challenges of today. Thank you very much.